Welcome to Simple GIS software video tutorial. Today's topic will be discussing working with legends on your layer objects in a Simple GIS Client project. To begin, we have a project loaded in our Simple GIS Client application with several layers loaded. In particular, in this case, we see that a layer called roads is visible, which is just a simple lines layer. If we double-click on this layer in the table of contents, we would see the Layer Properties dialog box appear. And we see this dialog box is actually made of three separate tabs. You have a Layers Property, a Legends tab, and a Label Definition tab. If we select the Legend tab, we would see that there's a legend type radio group, and currently our legend type is set to simple. We could have selected a legend type of unique, which would allow us to classify or have separate symbols for unique values in a data field in our layer, or we could have set it to range, which would allow us to symbolize based upon a range of values in a data field. Since our selected style is simple, we see that the symbol appears to the right of the legend type radio group. And if we double click on the symbol, we would see a symbol palette appear, which would allow us to select a new symbol. And if we click OK after selecting a new symbol and click Apply on our layer properties, we now see that the layer legend is changed to the symbol selected. If we go back to the Legend tab of our Layer Properties dialog box and select Unique for the legend type, for instance, we see now that the data field underneath becomes enabled. And if we click on the drop-down arrow, we would see all available fields in our layer. The field we select would indicate that we want to symbolize our layer based upon values in this field. By default, we have one row in our legend grid called Note Data. This means that if there is a value in our type field that doesn't match any of our other symbols, then it will be symbolized using this No Data symbol. To add a new row to our legend, we simply click the plus button underneath the grid, and we see that it adds a second row to our legend. To enter a value that we want to use to match the data field to for our symbol, simply double click in the empty value, and in the dialog box that appears, enter the value that you want to use. Likewise, double click on the label to add how you want to label this legend classification, and then double click on the symbol to open the palette dialog box and select a new symbol for that row. As we click Apply, we see our new legend in our table of contents, but currently all our lines are labeled by the No Data class. And that's because the value we entered, test, none of the rows contain that value in their type field. To remove a row from your legend, just simply select it and click the minus button. If we wanted to add all unique values that's currently in our layer under this data field, we could select the Add Unique Values button, and we see that it would add a row for each unique value in our layer based upon that field. And it went ahead and assigned symbols based upon a color gradient. And now if we click Apply, we see the legend that it created, and we now see our roads are symbolized using these new symbols. In addition, if we go back to our legend, we can change a symbol for any given row by simply going to the row that we want to change, double clicking on the symbol, which brings up the palette dialog box, selecting a new symbol, clicking OK, and then clicking Apply on our layer properties. In addition, we already discussed the No Data class. If we didn't have this classification already added and we wanted to add it, we could simply click on the Add No Data class button beneath the grid, and we see it would add a row for the No Data classification. In addition, we can change the order of the symbol classifications in our legend by simply selecting the row we want to move and using the up and down arrows to the right of our grid to move the row that we have selected. We can also save a legend to a file or we can load a legend that was previously saved from a Simple GIS project. As we click the Load Legend button, a file dialog box would appear in which we would select the legend file that we had saved previously. And in this case, after we select the legend that had been created before, we would see that it is loaded now into our legend properties. You can also scale a legend's symbols based upon the scale of the current map data view. To do this, look for the Scale Symbols checkbox located in the upper right corner of your Legend tab. If you do not wish to scale your symbols, make sure that the checkbox is unselected. And in this case, the symbols will be rendered to their original size regardless of the scale of your map data view document. However, if you did want to scale your symbols, simply go back to your legend properties, select the Scale Symbols checkbox, and enter in the reference scale that you want to use as the reference to scale by. In this case, if we enter 25,000 for our reference scale, since our current scale of our map data view document is 6108, as we click Apply, we would see that the symbols are rendered much larger because our map data view scale is much larger than our reference scale that we had entered. So it's scaled by the ratio of your map data view scale to the reference scale that you've entered. In this case, if we enter a smaller reference scale, as we click Apply, we would see that the symbols will be rendered much thinner and smaller. So now we'll go back to our legend properties, and in this case we're going to change our reference scale back to 25,000. Now as we look at our symbol, we'll notice, for instance, in this particular yellow symbol that we're using here, we see that there's a small gap in the outer border. This can be rectified by going to our legend, and then if we find that symbol for that type of roadway, and as we double click on it and bring up the palette, we can actually double click on the symbol to modify it. And in this case, if I go to the Pin Settings tab, I can rectify this by simply changing the end cap of the pin that's controlling the border to round. For more information about modifying and editing symbols, please see our other video tutorial regarding working with symbols in Simple GIS Client. In this case, we now see that this did in fact take care of the gap in the border pin, but now we see we have these other overlaps around the pin endpoints. If we go back to our legend properties and we find the checkbox that says Use Advanced Rendering, if we check this, this will actually help rectify this situation by using an advanced rendering scheme on our pin symbols. And now we see that we have this nice bordered pin style. Now we're going to look at a different legend type, and in this case we're going to be looking at a polygon layer we've loaded, and this is actually census tracts. In this case we're going to zoom out. I actually zoomed to the entire extent, so now I'm going to just zoom in around the lower 48 states. And then if we look at this data, we'll double click on this layer in our table of contents and go to its legend properties. In this case, we want to select a legend type of range. And what this does is classify a legend based upon data values that fall within a particular min and max value in your legend. So in this case, we selected a data field, which is the total population for the census tract. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the underlying table data for this layer. And in this particular layer, we're going to select the column heading, and then we're going to sort it so that we can get an idea of the range of values in this particular data field. So we see that it starts at 0 and it goes all the way to just over 37,000. So that gives us an idea of the range of values. So now we'll close that we'll go back to our map document, map data view document, and double click on our census tract layer. And go back to the legend property. And now we're just going to we're going to leave the first row a min value of 0, and we'll select a max value of 8,000 for it. And then we're actually going to change the symbol a little bit that it's going to use and adjust its color. We'll just make this lower value kind of a very light blue. We'll click apply and then adjust the symbol. So that'll be our first row. So min value of 0, a max value of 8,000. And now we'll add a second value, and we're going to pick up where our first row left off. So the min value in this case will be 8,000, and then we'll just use 8,000 for the increment, so our max value will be 16,000. And I forgot, we'll go ahead and add labels for these rows. And in this case, for the first row, I'm going to say the label is 0 to 8,000 pop for population. And then I'll enter a similar value for our next row. And again, I'm going to change this symbol a little bit as well. And in this case, I'll make the color a little bit deeper and darker, since it is a little bit more denser in population value. And I'm going to go ahead now and add another row, and again I'll just start off where I left off from before. So now the min value will be 16,000 and the max value will be 24,000. And then I'll go ahead and add a label for this legend row. And I'll go ahead and modify this symbol as well. In this case, I'll just kind of make it blend into a yellowish color. And I'll go ahead and add my next row. So I'll continue doing this. Again, just using 8,000 for the increments as I go from one row to the next. And then I'll just change the color a little bit as I continue to go, maybe going into the red hues as I get to the higher population densities. And then finally I'll add my last row, which will go from 32,000 to a max value of 40,000. And again, based upon our observation of the data from before, we know that the maximum value we have in our layer data is just over 37,000. So again, this will encapsulate the largest data values we have in our layer data. So now as I click apply, we now see that the map is rendered based upon these range of values. And as I zoom in, we'll see some of the higher population densities being displayed based upon the range of values that we had entered. So this concludes our tutorial on working with legends and Simple GIS Client projects. I hope this has been beneficial, and if you'd like more information, please visit simplegissoftware.com.